Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and ask each facilitator to introduce themselves. My name is Cynthia Wasco. Again, I am the Foundation and Corporate Relations Manager for Habitat for Humanity Tucson. I also have worked with Jennifer on several different projects. I'm in Tucson, Arizona, and I say this because not all our facilitators are in Tucson. And I'm just really excited and overwhelmed by the interest in this. So thank you all for being here. Shannon, do you want to go next?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Shannon Roberts. I'm the CEO of the Diaper Bank of Southern Arizona. I'm excited to be here, and I'm hoping that you guys will take away some great information. We've prepared something very special for you today. So welcome.
Innocent?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Innocent Saunders. I'm a nonprofit consultant. The name of my consulting firm is Groundwork for Change. I specialize in helping nonprofit founders get their organizations up and off the ground, all their operations pieces in place, and I'm based in Phoenix. I'm also equally overwhelmed and excited by the amount of folks we have joining us today, so thank you.
Kair?
Hello, folks. I'm Kair and Bellinger. I'm the founder of Immerse Alliance and Raw Productions here in Tucson, and also the co-founder of the Tribal Nations Music Tour. 4 decades, 4 states of multiple levels of nonprofit and community work, and I'm very excited to be here with you all today.
Milton?
Hi, I'm Milton Ames. I'm a certified financial planner and retired Air Force aviator. I'm in Tucson, and in Tucson, I've done financial literacy education for nonprofit members and their donors. I am a financial counselor on contract serving military members throughout the country, throughout the world, actually. And I'm pleased to be here and looking forward to the afternoon.
Thank you, Milton. And Brian.
Good afternoon, everyone. Brian Wood, Morris Coaching in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm one of those rogue facilitators from Phoenix, not in Tucson. And we're all about personal and professional growth, success coaching, and organizational development. Do a lot of work with athletes, former athletes, nonprofit executives, and I share Cynthia's sentiments with the overwhelm and the excitement about this project and today. So thanks, everyone. Great to see you all.
Okay, so I think Kairen's going to lead us in talking about our intent behind Courageous Conversations.
Woo! Exciting, you all. I'm putting my hands up. I'm like giving you guys all a virtual hug and a high five. Okay. So just setting the stage, because we realized when we got together, we were all so intentful and ready to go, and what are we going to do, and how's this going to work? And we soon realized that one of the most important things for this whole series, I think for all of us, is how we create the space for this to happen. What kind of environment, what kind of culture are we going to create for courageous conversations to really take place and be authentic and be real and from the heart. And so we spent some time, I believe a whole meeting and a half on just that, because we know that being part of this moves us past tolerance, it moves us past acceptance, and it moves us into action. In order for action, for sustainable change to happen, we have to be willing to really put everything into it. And it's going to be tough, it's not going to be pretty, it should not feel the same as a typical meeting, because we're in a different environment. So how do we do that? Our first priority is to create an environment of safety for everyone. We want everyone to feel safe to be authentic in this. And so by all means, take advantage of emailing off the chat if you have something that you'd like to say, because we realize the significance for your jobs and everything else that participating in some of these kinds of conversations can have. And so we want to make sure that you have ways to participate 100% safely. So that's really important to us. So by all means, take advantage of the emails, text message, or in the chat. This is being recorded. This is being recorded. So just so that you know that. We also feel that it's a shared experience. Like, we are moderators, all of us, right? But we're only experts in our own experience. And we bring that experience to the table, but we know in this new environment of courageous conversations that if we had a 17-year-old out as a moderator, that might be the most important session of this whole series. So again, we offer you guys to really participate. Yes, we are moderating, where we bring our experience, but we really want it to be a shared experience. And lastly, diversity in the conversation. So if we've created that safe, sacred space for this, then we should also champion and celebrate someone bringing a difference of opinion, things that may not feel good or sound good. But if we do not have that, we'll be back here 20 years from now. We realize that if we do not have diversity and differences of opinion brought to the table safely, then the courageous conversation, the action part, will be very challenging for us. So those are the three things that we wanted to offer to everyone: a safe environment, a shared experience, and celebrate diversity at all levels.
Thank you, Karen. So hopefully most of you saw within our emails and our posts about this series that we did have a survey that we as facilitators put out there. We really wanted to sort of get an understanding of where people were at. And so Brian's going to lead us in some of those findings, and then sort of, we'll roll into our conversation.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Cynthia. So yeah, let's talk about the survey, everyone, and a few things. For those of you out there who have completed the survey, thank you very much. Your effort really helps us to initiate productive and strategic conversations. Also, this survey was about gathering information. So just like any other survey, there's a margin of error. Maybe I didn't understand the question. Perhaps my interpretation of the question was different compared to other respondents. At any rate, the point is this: the survey is not absolute. It's not perfection. And if anyone out there is waiting for perfection, you're probably going to be waiting for a long time, just like Kair kind of explained. So it is an opportunity for us, though, however, to understand trends and identify patterns. And all that to say that we're not going to really dig into the weeds of the survey, but we will outline 4 components of the results. So here they are. The first one: 75% of the respondents have experienced or observed racial or cultural related stressors in a nonprofit organization. 75%. Number 2 of 4, 66% of respondents have not made a significant investment in funds and resources for the professional development of frontline staff members. Third component of the survey results: 66% of respondents have not been made aware of unconscious racial or culturally biased reflected in their organization's marketing, advertising, or fundraising results. And finally, number 4, this is the highest percentage on the survey results. 81% of respondents did not have a fear of losing funding resources by being involved in the education of racial and cultural issues in their organization. So those are the 4 key takeaways from the survey results, and I'll turn it back over to Cynthia to continue the dialogue.
Thanks, Brian. So we want to get a sense of who's already doing I.D.E.A. work. Just for reference, I.D.E.A. stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access. So I am going to send you all a poll And the question is, rate the readiness of your nonprofit organization to engage in I.D.E.A. work. Are you ready? Are you not ready? Or are you doing it already? So go ahead and submit your response. And once everyone has responded, it should give us the results.
And Cynthia, that's an anonymous poll when we do polls?
Yes, I will only see the percentages.
Okay.
Almost. Okay, so it looks like, oh, is it still tabulating? All right, so I don't want to click on this and see. So it looks like 28% are ready to dive into I.D.E.A. work. 26% are not yet ready. Their organization is not yet ready. And 47% are doing it already. So that's great. The 47% that are doing it already, I think that's, there we go. So now everyone should be able to see the results now. Yeah, I think that's great. So let's talk, okay, let's stop sharing results. Close, all right. So for those who have not, I'm gonna throw it out to the facilitators. Why would organizations not be ready, or how can we broach this topic for some of those organizations that are maybe not quite ready?
I can start. Well, first and foremost, kudos to those who are either doing it already or you feel like you are ready to do it. And for those of you who feel like your organizations are perhaps not yet ready to do it, but maybe you're ready to take a look at why, I would actually first examine that, right? There's a multitude of reasons why organizations feel like they may not be ready to engage I.D.E.A. in their work. There may be a perception of a lack of funds and that it would take money to be able to do it. There may be a perception of a lack of time. There may be a perception of a lack of interest. So I would think that one of the first low cost, low time consuming things to do is actually take a survey, similar to what we did for this particular intervention here, this particular workshop, and find out what the temperature is for your staff and or participants and or board, you know, all levels of the organization. But oftentimes we find that organizations who feel like they're not ready, perhaps feel like the barriers they perceive to be in place may need to be kind of readjusted or reexamined and checked to see if they're even valid concerns. And then from there, work on overcoming whatever barriers are revealed to be an actual situation for organizations to consider entering into this work.
Innocent, would you say that that would be sometimes that people may not know how to do that? Could that be one of the biggest challenges is, you know, we may be ready to make that change, but not necessarily know where to start. And then also not knowing what to expect from making that change. So sometimes it's uncomfortable and we don't know what to expect and we've always been in control. Perhaps that may be one of those barriers that you're speaking about, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I would think, you know, I'm glad the question broke it down in the way it did. For those of you who perceive that you are ready and just don't know where to start, that's very real. But to the point of even our calling this series Courageous Conversation, it will take some real courage to go forward and jump in and start the conversation. So yeah, I agree, Shannon.
I think with any change, change is hard. You know, people are so connected to the status quo and routine. So anytime there's change for this type of an approach or any other, it's important to have a sense of urgency and the ability to demonstrate the vision of what the end game looks like. And then kind of combine that with what Shannon mentioned, I think, and that's there's got to be some vulnerability. Back to the idea of if we're waiting for to be perfect or everything to be completely comfortable, we're not going to do anything. We're never going to take any action. So I think there's a combination. Some of the barriers could include a lack of urgency because maybe we just don't realize that we need to do this. We've got to build that case for change and communicate that. And most importantly, there might be a lack, sometimes ego will get in our way where we don't feel comfortable being vulnerable and transparent and honest and maybe we're afraid to ask for help. Those are a couple things that come to mind, Cynthia.
I have actually a question. Can anyone on the panel address the confusion of those who are not ready between embracing diversity and affirmative action?
Can you restate the question?
Sure.
Those who are not ready,
Can you? Sure. Okay, I'll repeat the question. Can you address the confusion of those who are not ready between embracing diversity and affirmative action?
Okay. That's a very good question, Cynthia, because that affirmative action rolls into 40 years of civil rights motion and movement to this point right now. So I know that I've already had questions come up around that because the affirmative action often discussion tailors back in, or the slippery slope goes back into numbers, right? Into numbers, how many Black people, how many this, how many that, right? You get into a numerical standpoint, but this is not a question of race. This is a question of racism.
Right.
It's not a question of Black or white. It's a question of actions and culture and the historical perspective of where we're at right now, why we're at there. So yes, affirmative action was an important step and continues to be. Diversity comes in multiple layers and it doesn't have a color attached to it. And it can, but it's a cultural thing. What we're talking about here is what happens in our hearts and our belief and our actions. And so I think that's the biggest thing. The getting it done, if we as executives with our nonprofits and whatnot, if we make it a line item in your business plan as a checkpoint, the same as you would writing a grant, researching the best marketing strategies, if you don't understand something, that's the courageous conversation is where, just make it a line item for you to gain the understanding. Put it on your calendar right now. That would be my recommendation. Put it on the line of your business plan for something for you to investigate, ask questions about, get in those conversations. The same way you do how to write a grant. You do the same thing. You have a strategy meeting, you do a survey, are we going to add these new services, right? That's what you do when you want to provide a new program with your nonprofit. You go through a process of discovery, community need, what resources are out there. We all know how to do this because we're all in the nonprofit field. Just add this to the business plan. And you as a professional will reach out and get the resources to help you begin to go down that road.
And when I look at that question, I mean, if I'm thinking about this, I think of affirmative action as a plan that says, I have to do this, I'm complying. When I think of embracing diversities, I want to do this. I want to respect people's cultures. I want to respect differences. So to me, they're two very different things, right? And so You know, to Kyron's point, the affirmative action plan goes back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 going forward, right? It's where people are saying you have to do this so that we know that you're acknowledging race differences, right? Or national origin. Diversity doesn't have to say that. It says, I respect you as a human being and what you bring to the table. I'm going to throw all the different things out, but it's, I want to do that. I want to embrace that, not that I'm required to do it.
If I could just add to that, Kyron and Shannon, you remind me of, there was an executive who wrote a foreword to a book about getting rid of institutional bias in our organizations. And he used an analogy, I'll share that resource later if I can, but he used an analogy when it comes to diversity, and we intentionally include the words inclusion and access as well, and equity, of course, but when it comes to diversity, it's a matter of using all the players a team has available. If you have a team with this great diversity of people and characteristics, but you only play half the team ever, you're not really tapping into the full potential of what you have at your disposal. And the same can be said for our organization. If we don't become intentional about diversifying the people that we work with, the people who work with us, our partners, our staff, our board, we're not really taking full advantage of the fullness of the talent and the strengths and the abilities of those closest to us, of those in our community. And so just kind of marrying the two of what you said, if you want to look at it from a strategic perspective, yes, we need a diversity of cultures and all types of backgrounds so that we can do our best work. Or if you want to think about it from a compliance aspect, which we would hope not, but for the sake of numbers, you would want to diversify as well. So thank you for those two. You just reminded me of that particular. You want to play the whole team if you have a whole team available.
Be intentional with it. I like that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
a lot of it is, a lot of it, when you look at diversity, it's imagination, which is one of the most powerful leadership components, right? We're doing pretty good, status quo, routine, but the imagination component of diversity is, well, what are we losing? What are we missing? And what could we be doing? What's possible if we got everyone involved in this process? And I love that, what Kair mentioned with that accountability. There's a line item number, and that number represents your commitment. So that's the accountability. You look at that number and say, wow, that's way too small of a commitment, or okay, we're heading in the right direction. That doesn't lie. That number is not going to lie. So a couple thoughts.
I think much of what we're talking about is happens at a personal level. Also, it kind of starts with oneself in knowing oneself and how to motivate people, and then putting in place those procedures or practices that kind of brings everybody on board with this conversation. I speak to, over the years in the Air Force, 30, we've gone through these instances of racial identification. We had a program called Social Actions, and it really brought people together in small small group settings, where we would have a conversation about our background and our beliefs and where they came from. And as a young person in the military back when we were doing this, it really opened my eyes to how narrow my world is and how narrow other people's worlds are. We're really talking about cultural difference. And until those are brought out in conversation, you as an individual, or each individual, not have the opportunity to understand what the other person is thinking and what they bring to the workplace, what life exposures they've had already. And I think once you realize that you don't know what you don't know. And there now is an opportunity for you to expand the depth of understanding and the camaraderie within the organization, because we start to understand each other starting with self, and then at a personal level, the people that we work with.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for those thoughts. We actually got a couple more questions. So going back to those organizations that may be thinking about starting, can anyone give specific tips on how to start the conversation?
You mean, repeat that, specifics on how to start the conversation?
How to start the conversation about I.D.E.A. within your organization?
You know, I'll say this, Cynthia, that a lot of great things happen when we take specific and strategic action. In other words, deliberate practice. You know that conversation right out of the gate is going to be tough. How do you prepare for that? So athletically, leadership-wise, or almost anything else, it involves being comfortable with being in that space to be uncomfortable. So a lot of the things that we do, if we could take deliberate practice, this is the conversation you're going to have with Brian. It doesn't seem so daunting when that practice session happens again and again and again. And then what if Brian says this? And let's look through some other scenarios. And let's just pretend that this is the reaction. That puts you in a better place to prepare. Just again, like athletically, you put in the work in practice and you are prepared for that moment. When it's time for you to take your shot, when it's time for you to make a play, you can do that. Same exact thing. It's not going to be comfortable, but it's going to be more comfortable because I've practiced for this moment. And my body is not seizing up when I'm having this conversation. My body and my mind understands that, okay, I've done this before. I've been through this. This is not my first rodeo. So I think deliberate practice is such a big component of what we do.
And I'd like to piggyback on that very thing and on how you practice and where the opportunities are for you. Having that deliberate intent is my first response to the question. Just asking the question is awesome. I applaud you. Number one, exactly. You've already begun your own internal courageous conversation.
Yeah.
Number one, that's number one. The number two is how, because Brian's absolutely right. Practice. I practice before this call, everything I do. I was sent to Chicago to be part of a national think tank on education in poor communities. And so I got there 6 hours early. What did I do? I got on the, I don't know if it was A train or whatever, the South Side train was from the airport to the police station that was deep in that area. I've never been in Chicago. And I literally asked to speak to a police officer who works in the community. And I asked questions there prior to going to the meeting. There's so many resources right now. This conversation is happening everywhere. You can step outside your circle of people that you've been comfortable with for years, perhaps, and seek out new people to ask that very question. I'm an executive director for this program, and I want to engage the board or the front line in this conversation. Can I just ask what that might look like if you are working for me? And I mean, there's so many different people to reach out to have that conversation with. Just ask and partner, and then bring that back to your group.
I think it goes a step further too. I think when you say get comfortable being uncomfortable, I think it's asking, for people at various levels of your organization, what does it look like to them, and what they'd like to see. And be prepared. As they say, practice, be prepared, because I think you're going to get a variation of responses, but I think when you ask that question and those are your stakeholders now that you can get to help you put a plan together to make some of these benchmarks or leap these hurdles, but also have them do some of that legwork with you and help pioneer with you in making that change. But I mean, honestly, I think it's a lot of being comfortable, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because you got to ask that question. I don't care what level of the organization, whether an employee, volunteer, What does diversity look like to you? What does inclusion look like? Do you feel included? If you don't, why? You ask those questions.
I also think Karen made a point about partnering with others. Many of us want to have the conversations and we're willing to have them, and we're even perhaps feeling bold enough to have them, but are not comfortable leading them. So seeking the help of an outside facilitator to even just initiate that conversation with you and your board, or you and your C-suite, or you and your staff, whomever it is that you are ready to engage in that conversation with, can be helpful. You're ready to talk about it, you want to talk about it, but literally the question is how. That's a facilitator, a trainer, someone to come in and kind of lead you through that if possible.
In a sense, that's a very good point, because I found myself in those positions as well in counseling couples in the financial world. They have different ideas, even though they live in the same household, and it takes a third party to bring them on to the same page. So I in that this not facilitated outside counsel or consultant or someone with expertise would be the way to get this started without any unconscious bias.
I would say this also, that think about what's at risk by not having those conversations. Think about the pain at an organizational level and even at a personal level. Has anyone on this call ever been in a position where they've said, you know what, I should have said something? I have. I should have said something. And when you don't say something, and when you don't have that conversation, and you don't take the action that you should have taken, that pain it far exceeds the pain of any action you would have taken. So any pain created by action pales in comparison to the suffering and regret of inaction, in my experience.
And if I could throw in there also, as leaders or facilitators and whatnot, we often, and I know I raised my hand to this, right? We often are seeking an outcome in our actions, especially with our businesses, right? Like we're saying, let's do this so that there's an outcome here. And we through our own process through what good might look like in that. But I would offer, even for myself, I've really been practicing this, because in order for this change that's happening now, because it is different than what happened 15 years ago or what happened in the 60s. There's a possibility that our country can actually change. And can I get an amen for that? Like a high five amen for that?
Amen.
Actually, possibility now. I'm not even going to play around with it. Right? So it's like, are we willing to step, like maybe initiate the conversation, but maybe someone in your organization, like a new hire or someone, ends up being facilitating the outcome that maybe you didn't even think of. Like it can come from anywhere. And that's part of this, is like, are we willing to be really uncomfortable ourselves? Because if you find you open up a can of worms and you call it that. You see, I even call it that, a can of worms. But if you open up a conversation and you find that 90% of people do not agree with you, then we have a different conversation. Maybe it's not your organization, or maybe, you know what I mean? It's like, are we willing to toe the line and be really part of this change, even if it's not the outcome that we anticipated as a leader? Like, it's really, it feels different now. We have an opportunity. Are we willing to do what it takes to embrace that forward motion with this opportunity?
Well, one thing that happens in large organizations is they will have an annual survey of what the employees are feeling, and it's done by a third party. And that information is rolled up, and then there is a team made up of personnel across the depths of the organization to come together and evaluate the results of that survey and come up with responses to that. And not all of those responses are immediate actions, but they put it on a long-term plan to address. Like Kair said, maybe it's a line item with a date frequency for reviewing. But somewhere you need to pulse the organization just like we did to find out what you need to know. But that really does need, I'll say again, that should be a third-party facilitator.
And you know, Milton, I think that's a great idea, but the question becomes, you know, it's one thing to take those surveys and to put them on a budget, I'm sorry, a line item, as Kair said earlier. But it's another thing to come back and check for engagement, check for, to make sure that they're actually implementing it, right? And I agree, you said at some point you have to, you come back and revisit it and say, where are we at? But if it's not working, at that point is where you have to go back and reassess and say, look, we've tried this isn't working, so what's new? And my question would be, at that point, is it appropriate for an employer to go back and re-engage their constituents and say, hey, look, this is what you've brought forward. This was a plan that we've agreed to go forward with. We're checking to make sure that we are working towards that goal, but we find that we're not there yet. Is there another approach that we should try?
I think, Shannon, that's such a powerful approach. No question, right? The answer is yes. First of all, two things. One is, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
Right.
And then in this case, it's, all right, we've got a plan, we've got a strategy, everything is all good. And it can also be unrealistic to expect that journey to take place with no distractions, no bumps in the road, no issues, no opportunities to adjust. I think that we earn way more at the organizational level when we say, look, this is what we came up with. This was the plan. Based on what we're seeing, we need to adjust and we need your help. Completely agree with you, Shannon.
And that's the reason for a third party to be engaged to keep it moving along.
Makes sense. It eliminates the ego and this is my project. And I think that makes well,
it eliminates the fear factor too for those that are participating.
Yep.
If I could take the other side of the coin on that, it does. You're absolutely right. I've worked as a consultant and I've used consultants and surveys and whatnot, but also, you know, working on the front line as a team director, outward bound, you name it. I've been in a room where, you know, those employees they fill out those surveys. We all laugh together and we send it up the chart, and we know what's coming down the pipeline is some new initiative that the executive board thinks that they think they have influence over us on the front line. So, I mean, I think to the point is, I don't think it's about being safe. I don't think it's about like being comfortable. Where this is like this. I mean, yes, we need to have movement happen, but the whole point is those tools are very important. The survey tool, extremely important. How you set it up, is the most important part.
Yep.
And that comes from not someone who doesn't know the people in the organization. That comes from someone within the organization that the people trust. And if people don't trust you to just go up and to even be honest and say, I don't know what to do here, but I would like our organization to embrace this new conversation. So, hey, everyone, I'm bringing in an outside survey group, you know, and have that conversation. So the tool is very important, to Milton's point. And it's good to have that outside person just to hold the mirror up. But I would caution against safety and comfort, because that could have us roll right back into what we've been doing for the last 40 years. And so instead of embracing the courageous conversation, because we're moving beyond tolerance, which is policy, acceptance, which is code of conduct and programming, but into actual behavioral change. So I think just keep in mind, whatever you do, it's not always about being safe. It's about embracing this new change.
Absolutely. Once again, get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? I think that's
Speaking
that-
of being
that-
uncomfortable,
That could go two different ways. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
So one way could be I walk in, I say to the team of employees that are going to experience this survey, HR wants us to do this thing, and I roll my eyes, and that's going to go down this path. But if I show up and say, look, I need help, that's why I went to the outside. I care about you and your families and our culture, and I am passionate about where we can be. I need help, and this is why. Please be honest. Two different entire outcomes. So that setup has got to happen. If
Right.
not, we're just playing games, and the numbers,
Yeah.
the surveys will not be reflective of anything that we can use to drive change.
and so just speaking on that, being uncomfortable, what strategies or responses would you recommend to leaders who are getting pushback from staff or board members who say that they find the diversity conversation or trainings or consultancies, to be offensive or reverse discrimination? What are some things that leaders can do to sort of combat that attitude?
I wouldn't combat it. First, I would say thank you for being honest,
Mm-hmm.
and celebrate that right away. Like, thank you for, like, that's what we need. We need everyone to tell their truth. It's the only way. So we appreciate that. So now let's begin the conversation. Now that I understand your truth, I'd like to share my truth and begin the conversation. I wouldn't even think about, actually, I would try. One of the hardest words that I think in this whole conversation that could happen with us as leaders is the word yes. If you initiate a conversation and that you just get head nodding and yes, you're probably not getting the depth of what this is really about. If your whole organization is like yes, they just want to keep your jobs, right? So I would throw that away about it's a negative thing for someone to not agree or to say, just because I'm white, means all of a sudden means I'm not as valuable as someone who's black. Like, all of that is real. It's all really real. We don't get paid well in the nonprofit world. We have to be really careful on how we work with our people. At the Arizona Bowl, I lead the community festival. I like 70 nonprofit organizations there. You know how many times I call someone for the next year and then they go, oh, I'm no longer working at this one, I'm working over here. Right? It happens all the time. We flip around all over because we don't get paid well. It's hard. We're living in a financially dependent system. So absolutely, my gosh, if people come to you and say, I don't like this, this Black Lives Matter, I don't agree with it or whatever, say thank you. Thank you for starting the conversation, because that's what we need in our organization, is to have everyone on board with their personal truth, and we can really talk about what it means to run the diaper banks.
Well, and let me say this too,
right?
To that very point, by doing that and taking that action, that is demonstrating and that is embracing and that is celebrating diversity.
Absolutely.
Right? Diversity in thought. It is antithetical to everyone going like this. No, that's that different position over there. I completely disagree with it, but we embrace that. Bring it in. So now, as a leader, you're demonstrating diversity. You're not just talking it.
But that's absolutely, and I would hope that they'd be a part of that conversation. And I think it's important to find out why they feel like it's reverse discrimination, or why they feel like it's one-sided. But I think if you look outside the door, the community's telling us what's going on now, right? They're telling us they're tired, they're ready for a change. So I implore them to say, hey, look, so how do we address, if you look at your neighbors and your constituents, your clients, the people you serve, they've demonstrated that we're ready for a change. So what about this makes it feel reverse discriminatory? What about it makes you feel like not included? Let's talk about that.
And just to take that a step further, I think once we've acknowledged folks' feelings and different perspectives, it's always important to bring it back to the mission.
Absolutely.
You know, Shannon pointed out, you know, this is what the community, the people we serve, the world we live in, this is the direction it's going. Mission-wise, you would want to be in alignment. Board member, CEO, sir, ma'am, whomever it is, right? Strategically speaking, you would want to be in alignment. This is a true environmental threat to your organization. Not if you don't jump on the bandwagon, but if you don't begin to at least consider these terms, consider these aspects, the diversity, the inclusion, the access, and the equity. So taking a look at the larger environment and putting it in that context, once again, after having affirmed and heard all the opinions, these are decisions being made for the sake of the organization and the people that it serves in the current state of the world. It would be irresponsible to some extent to not consider these things. So.
And what suggestions might you have for leaders who, nope, that wasn't the question I wanted to ask, but that's another question. This question here, how can organizations avoid looking to the person of color in the room to speak for an entire group, but still be able to ask questions and seek knowledge?
Oh my God, that is like, I'm sorry, I'm giggling, but that happens a lot. For those of you who may not, that is like so.
It's real.
It's so
Yeah.
real, and
Yeah.
not just
Yeah.
in an executive standpoint, but I'll walk up to a group of musicians and they won't hand me the guitar. What instrument do you think they'll hand me? These are musicians who love or
Saxophone?
no, a drum.
Really?
I'm thinking,
Like literally, the summer solstice, all these guitars, all these acoustic guitars, and they're like, oh, wait, and they run and grab the djembe and they bring it over to me. So what did I do? I just grabbed the djembe and just started playing it like all crazy, like I was a 3-year-old, and it totally disrupted the whole, the whole circle. But anyway, it's a little funny. So I would say that is something to be honest about, number one, but also careful about it in the public forum, because going to our intentions with this series, safety is first. If you create a safe environment, then you can have true, diverse, courageous conversations, right? So just think about that. If you have one person of color or LGBT or someone that represents an underserved group in your circle, yes, the eyes might turn and say, hey, let's talk about this conversation. Naturally, the energy will flow then. So I would anticipate that. Have the conversation with them on the side. Say, would you like to speak to this? Or because it's going to happen naturally. Like one of the things, we don't have to fight what's going to happen naturally, right? It's going to happen naturally.
I think you have to be, as a leader, you have to think and be mindful that color doesn't represent culture, right? And so just because the person of color in the room doesn't mean they represent all cultures of the same color. So, I guess the short answer would be to, educate yourselves and understand that when you're looking at the person of color for their input or feedback, understand that it's broader than just a Black man in the room. It's broader than just a Latin woman in the room. It's what's my culture? And look at the makeup of my organization and say, okay, well, I may have one Black man here and 4 Nigerians, right? So you really have to think about that and be very careful when you choose that person of color to speak on behalf of everyone. Because I couldn't tell you the first thing about a Nigerian culture, but I'm not afraid to ask, right? So I would just think that we'd be mindful of that.
And I would also say, I understand the inclination to want to get that person's input. and you absolutely should, but don't discount the rest of the observations
Right.
at your disposal as well. You know, that's why I led with the survey, and it may sound really sterile, or maybe that's not your style. That's okay, but the results that Brian read earlier of people saying that they had seen some cultural or racial stressors in their work, Cynthia or Brian, can someone remind us? I believe like 80% of the respondents did not identify as people of color. So if
Yeah.
you would want to get the perspective of the person of color, or the diversity person in your organization, there are people who don't identify as people of color observing things as well.
84% to be specific of respondents.
Yeah, did not identify as people of color. So I know the inclination usually when we bring up diversity and this topic is, oh, well, we have the one or two Black staff people, or the one or two Hispanic staff people. I've even seen organizations automatically throw those folks in a ad hoc kind of diversity committee. It's like, I didn't sign up for this. My job is to do A, B, and C. Right. But yeah, so you don't want to just kind of default to that. So in seeking to get their input, seek to get other input as well, the input of others as well.
So that is definitely, I think Shannon mentioned it. This is real. This happens. We've all been there where that awkward, Brian, what do you think? And I think setting things up is such a key component here in advance. This stuff is going to happen. These conversations are going to surface. When they do, we would love your perspective, but we want to respect you. Before you even have the conversation, you've set it up in a way that you know that person, these people in the room are comfortable with speaking on that issue and providing their perspective. And it's also good from the other side to realize that more times than not, the intentions are good. They may be curiosity, but more times than not, trying to get that one person in the room, their perspective is something that may not be communicated perfectly, but the intentions of, I want your perspective and your understanding may be good.
And the opposite could be just as challenging and hard. My example is I was brought a bunch of money to a board that I was on, and this conversation came up around diversity within programming. Like, they wanted to create new programs for youth that served different diverse groups in the community. And yet the board I was the only person of color in the room. And I felt like they were avoiding looking at me. And so, because they didn't want to have that happen. So but they were saying things like, perhaps we can bring in someone from the outside to talk to this issue. And so finally I was just like, I'm right here, y'all. I'm not going anywhere. Let's just talk about it. But that's me. I'm talkative. I'm assertive. I'm kind of for myself. But avoiding the person who's diverse in this conversation without pre-talking about it or that kind of thing could also have an effect that may not serve the conversation.
Well, depending on personalities also may determine whether that person is really the person to lead a conversation or to refer to. You know, you have in the organization, you have formal leaders and informal leaders. And perhaps in an organization, one would need to know who that is. And maybe that's where you start with trying to find an approach that will be acceptable broadly. You know, have that side conversation, that preparatory conversation with people that have the personality to deal with it and have the followership, people that are going to listen to it.
I love that point, Milton, because it speaks to, if you've ever studied like organizational change, right? You have to get your buy-in committee first. You know, I don't remember the technical terms for it, but you speak very much to that. And when we talk about I.D.E.A, it is a shift in culture. It is a change organizationally. It will be infused. So I saw someone in the chat, and those of you in the chat were getting to some of the questions. I know it's not all of them, but I saw someone in the chat, refer to, I forgot, just that's quick. But anyway, you want to get the people involved who have the fellowship, who can be those ambassadors for this. When it comes to I.D.E.A, it's going to be infused into your policies, like Kair said. It's something you think about when considering, as a, for example, or this is a quick, for example, our expense reimbursement policy, right? Is our policy that you have to pay for items out of your pocket first and then be reimbursed? Does that really serve your employee base? Do you know that your employees have the ability to come out of their pocket and wait for a reimbursement? It's just that kind of one-off thing where it's like, no, you need to consider diversity in terms of class and economic status and all of those things, even when putting together something as simple as your policy for how you exchange your receipts for cash or what have you, how you order office supplies. So yeah, it really is an organizational shift in culture. It's not the check boxes. It's not do this, say that, do this, say that, this many people, this percentage. And it will be felt and seen if it is done that way.
And speaking of check boxes, we've seen a lot in social media, or if when the BLM movement started, I got so many emails from so many companies that I'm on their mailing list of their diversity and inclusion statement. And so that always seems like they just checked a box. Like, this is what they did. They are part of the movement too, because they've sent you this email or they've posted it on their Facebook. But is there a list available, or, has anyone seen companies or leadership specifically doing this I.D.E.A work well that we can look to as examples, where it's not just checking off a box?
I think it's fresh.
It's fresh. It's just taking hold in the military, and a lot of these cultural, social changes that take place in society take place in the military first. So there is really, I'm not on active duty anymore, but I stay in touch. And there's a concerted effort that this is not a passing fad, that they're drilling down to the squadron level to have these conversations. And they're doing things that you wouldn't expect 30 years that they would be concerned with. But it all facilitates the mission, getting the job done. And you have the diversity in the military is huge. So it only makes sense to address the issues and have a resource or an outlet that people can find resolution.
I'd like to piggyback on that, because I was at the Air Force Base yesterday, and I call it the June 6th initiative. I know that's not the name of it, Milton, but I think that's, if you guys haven't seen it yet, the Air Force initiative on this issue it's very, very powerful. When General, Milas, addressed Congress, right? Yeah. And stated this, in the Senate congressional hearing, that was an epic moment in our country. And so that's something to change that. But I also, if I can, someone asked a question about why is I.D.E.A mission central for a nonprofit? That's a great question, because I think what we're all doing here, I'll speak to that personally, is what we want is the actual outcome, and we all have different missions with our various nonprofits. And we want that mission of service to be the most successful. And so your question was reminding me of what Milton is saying. One of the reasons why I was talking to one of the chiefs yesterday is because it's essential to their mission to do this, because the military is made up of all different kinds of people. And if they're going to marginalize any of those, any member, then their mission is affected. And so I don't know if I.D.E.A as an acronym is the way to go, or for your particular project or whatever, but what is the most effective way to be part of the community today? And the community is going through this growth, and where does your nonprofit fit into that future, I think is part of this. But you're absolutely right. Each nonprofit needs to make their own decision on how they want to address this social cultural change, in our community.
Well, and just to follow on your coattail there, because the question was, why is it I.D.E.A Mission Central? I think, and I could be way in left field, but this is just my personal opinion. We've talked about diversity and inclusion for the last 20 years, right? We've talked about it, but what have we done about it? And once again, I refer you back to, if you look out in your very parking lot and you see your neighbors, your community, they're telling you at this point, it's time to be accountable. It's time to take action. We've talked about it for 20 years. It hadn't happened. So now, I think if it becomes a mission central focus, it kind of forces you to put it into place and make it happen. That's my thought. I could be in left field, but that's just my personal feeling about it.
So we had some other questions here that I want to make sure we get to, since we are coming close with time. Has anyone seen a diversity survey that you would recommend to the group?
I have. Should I drop it in the comments? Probably, I'd have to look for it. I don't know the.
Sure. I mean, if you find it before we end, great. You can drop it into the chat. If not, Innocent, you can send it to me and we can follow up with everyone.
Okay.
With some
I have a suggestion. This is one of the things I was going to offer as a reference, but there is I have it here, a book, and you can get the PDF, but it's called Racial Healing Handbook. And it is by Annalise Singh. It was published in 2019. That is designed with various it's like a workbook where you could have small group sessions on each chapter. I would suggest that you take a look at that. You can find it on eBay and download the PDF for $2. And it's a 241-page document, but I think it will help guide a procedure or conversation that you'll get quite a few ideas on some things that you might be able to do within your organization. The other thing that I thought of was there are quite a few books now, and the Air Force has put out quite a few references that I'll be talking about in my presentation in a month or so. But you might start a book club around some of those books, a book club within the organization, a book club across organizations. Maybe you have a sister organization that you have a similar mission with, that you could collaborate with. But those are some of the ideas that I was going to throw out.
Great, thank you, Milton. And so does anyone on the panel have any best tools for measuring success? So if an organization, starts this work, what's a good tool for measuring success?
Yeah, you keep asking these tough questions.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer in the climate surveys and coming back around and check. But I think the key is not to do them once a year, to do them often. Because once you initiative and put it into place, and to try to keep them involved and keep them going, keep it moving forward, not just stopping there.
I'd say there's a couple different survey-like approaches, but not exactly, kind of connected to that ongoing, how are we doing, status kind of check-in. So there's some performance gap indicators. I know some of those, I don't have them with me right now, but I know that's a good one to look at if you're interested in just understanding where your gaps are, because we all have gaps in our organizations. How do we narrow that gap? And those check-ins will enable us to ensure accountability. That would be one I would suggest.
I'd like to throw out a survey idea. Kair being Kair. There's like the creators of like who creates the surveys, right? I'm in the nonprofit sector, predominantly white in executive leadership. A lot of female as well too. All that's cool. And here we are in the Southwest with a variety of we're living on tribal land, Tono Onum, Pasquaki, Apache, Navajo, Hopi, Pueblos. Yet I haven't seen a survey a company created by the individuals that we're talking about in this conversation. And often, the leaders in organizations who want to dictate, which is us, the outcome of what we're talking about. So we go to a survey company, or we get with the board and we say we want to do a survey. And I'm just going to keep rolling back to, we have to be courageous in this. We got to think out of the box. We got to include, the people that we're not thinking of including. If you have a small nonprofit, there's only 3 of you, and you're all white and wonderful people, what does that look like in this conversation? Right? So I was like, what does that look like? Well, maybe you join a collective of other small nonprofits and whatnot. I don't know. But if we don't include everyone in this conversation, no matter how small you are, then I would challenge myself and anyone else to be more courageous and do so. Even when it comes to these typical business measures, surveys, business plans, all this stuff, it's time to rethink this. This particular line item, going back to the very first thing, I was talking about line item, I didn't mean that to sound like a typical line item in the business sense. I meant just have intent to be part of this courageous conversation as your daily plan.
It's a recurring calendar item. Yeah.
Yeah. Think out of the box.
I want to bring up one thing. When I was operations officer of a squadron, I created a system. Of course, we're bureaucratic, so we got different layers. So from the squadron commander, you got flight commanders, etc. So I would have my flight commanders who were in charge of 10 to 12, maybe 15 people. Of course, in the military, we have recurring efficiency reports every 6 months, every year, etc. So I would encourage the flight commanders to sit down with each person individually and dig deeper than just what we saw, but to also get feedback from that individual being evaluated on what they see from their side of the table. And then the flight commanders would bring that information up to me. And then, surprisingly, we found issues that I didn't even know existed. So that method of feedback tends to work if it's honest and open and non-punitive.
So question to the group, what thoughts might you have for moving a board along in these efforts, especially if that is the most non-diverse part of your organization?
I think the boards probably need to understand that there is a concern, and most of them aren't thinking at that level deep down into the organization, probably. So if we're going to start with with an education, then it probably needs to start at the board level,
Absolutely.
so that they understand the inefficiency that they may be having just because they're not addressing the full complement of human resources that they have in the organization.
People don't care about what you do, they care about why you do it. So the why has got to be emphasized. The why could include the critical nature of extracting every ounce of talent from everyone in that organization, right? That is some urgent stuff right there, right? What is the why behind this? We're not doing this to check the box. This is a big deal. We've got to figure this out, and we've got to figure this out and take specific action steps right here, right now.
And I think it goes back to having an evolving board, not being stagnant, understanding what's going on around you and making sure they have the resources. And I think you guys both hit on it. If you're stuck and you don't know, this is when you pick up the phone, call a partner agency and say, hey, look, what are you guys doing? We're stuck on this bridge. Don't you know it?
Right.
And if you can't fix it, don't be afraid to ask for help to get over that hump.
Yeah. No one person has the absolute answer.
Absolutely.
To what might work for your organization. So a collaborative, having a group that you can lean on.
Iran might have all the answers.
Yeah.
And for my own experience.
I think it's also,
Call Kair.
when it comes to working with the board, I think education is an important piece, but also couching it in like the duty of care. We mentioned several times that this is what's going on in the world. And to respond in such a dismissive way regarding the health and safety of the organization that you have signed on to be a trustee of, takes you out of doing your duty of care. So, let's start, dear board member, with reading this book perhaps, or reviewing this report perhaps. There's tons of research that many of it has been simplified and made available to talk about the importance of I.D.E.A. for organizations. But I think one possible way is just really bringing it back to not only will this serve our mission, but you as a trusted board member, regardless of personal feelings or what have you, it would make sense to study this, read up on this a bit, and think about the organization as a whole.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would work for everyone. Some board members don't even understand their duty of care and duty of loyalty, all of those things, but for those who take it seriously, that could be an entryway to at least in the
Well, it's part of being a leader. It's part of having that mantle of I run this organization, I'm in charge. And being in charge is being a leader. And what you're managing is the outcome of all the resources that you have under your leadership. And that means that even the lowest common denominator employee needs to be motivated by you. It's your job to make everyone that works for you be the best that they can be and help guide them. So you need to put those things into place so that the folks that are working for you now may someday be in your seat, running that organization. So you need to think of people as a resource that's not a throwaway. It's even if they don't stay with you, you have done the greater good by making them the best that they can be while they're under your leadership.
Great.
Yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to get to a couple more questions before we end today.
I just jumped in on that board question though. I'm just so I was patiently waiting.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I was patiently waiting on that board.
Oh,
question.
on the board. Go ahead.
Oh my gosh. All right. I just really think it begins with you. It begins with you. So if you show up to the board meeting, you maybe set it somewhere else, outside or something else. You demonstrate you know what? There's a different conversation. if you're, like I said before, if you're 3 white people with a small nonprofit, that's diversity. That's a powerful group. Great. And you have a board, right? If you're in a large board, large organization, but it begins with you. Maybe if you show up to a board meeting and you say, can I take 10 minutes? And you read out loud what you wrote on white privilege and what it means to you with, historical property, money, all this stuff. Like, what does it mean to you? And just start with you. And as a leader, if you start with you and people see you being vulnerable, they see you actually reaching in and taking a risk in this conversation, then I think that's, for me, that's my recommendation.
Thanks, Kair. So one other question that we had, so if you are an organization that is putting in the work and you've had good training, what are some good next steps to just keep it going?
I go back to gauging for understanding or checking for understanding, and that could be just, personally going out and touching base with your staff. Get some real-time feedback. Granted, like I said, I do like the climate surveys, but I think there's other ways to do that. And that's, being involved in the workspace and asking people, just what do you feel? Do you feel like we're addressing these needs? Or what would you like to see change? And I think people will tell you, when I ask that question, what do you want to see change? Most people say, we're taking the steps, right? If they see it and they feel it, I believe they'll be honest with you. If they tell you that, look, I still feel this way, well, then you go to another person, have that conversation with them. Now, larger organizations, again, then you have to get a little more creative with it, right? But most of our nonprofits are small. So I think, as a leader, we have to step out of our office, get it from behind our desk, and actually get out there and know what's going on and touch those people and say, hey, we have this initiative last year or 4 months ago. Do you feel that we're there? Do you feel the work that we're doing? What would you like to change about it?
Or you could have a suggestion box that we used to have before there was electronics, or some way that people can make suggestions on improving the organization. It may not be around diversity necessarily, but the idea is to have some way of people putting in suggestions for improvement in the organization. Because believe me, as a leader, you're not going to see all the things that are wrong. By the time they get elevated to you, they're maybe at a crisis level. So it's the folks at the lower level that are going to see things, and they need to have an avenue of bringing it up. Anonymously is probably the preference.
Okay, there's another question that just came in. I want to make sure we get to it. So if you collaborate with other organizations in the community and they boast and proclaim that they are diverse, but they may not actually be, how do you have a respectful conversation with them about that?
I think you just have it. I just, I get thinking a little different than this. I don't think you sugarcoat it. You reach out to the leadership and say, hey, look, you elevated to your leadership, and the two heads of the organization, you have that conversation and say, hey, look, we really like collaborating with you, but here's a few things that I'm concerned about, and not just me, but my staff have concerns about it. And what are your thoughts on it? Do you see it? Because sometimes they may not see it, and I hate to say it, but sometimes the leadership level, we should know everything that's going on, right? But let's be real. We don't know everything that's going on. And unless it's brought to us, we don't know to go out there and say, hey, we'll play nice in the sandbox before you get kicked out of the park, right? So I just say you have the conversation.
And I think when you go to have the conversation, be clear about what, as you do with all communication, what you expect to be an outcome, what you hope to be an outcome. Are you having the conversation just to call them out? Are you having the conversation because they're a community partner that you want to continue to do work with? However, you have some concerns about their presentation in the community, and so you want to respectfully share. So be clear about what your intent in having the conversation is, and I think that'll help shape how you say what you say when you say, and take it from there. I would also encourage you to be clear for yourself what you will do as a result of that conversation and the response. And I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have, particularly I think the person who asked alluded it could be a community partner. So by first, acknowledging the areas of diversity where they have made some cases, and then presenting from your observation on a community level, the areas where they could be doing better. I think that's how we present constructive feedback, right?
Yeah, and I agree with you, Innocent, because let me tell you, I would be embarrassed if another organization came to me and said, look, this is what's going on. This is what your team, this is what your organization is doing, or these are the things that are happening. You guys say you're diverse, but yet we see these things. So, I mean, I am absolutely, it forces you to want to go and address it, because, if we're saying that we live by these values and we're a mission-driven organization, and if our mission is, we're I.D.E.A centered or focused, or we're diverse and we respect this diversity and racism, all that good stuff, and we're not modeling it, wow. Then I have to ask myself, are we really doing the work, right?
This is the emperor's clothing, right?
Yes.
You think we're doing everything great. I would really, if it were the other way around, I'm like Shannon, right? I would like someone to say, hey, guy, hey, Brian, you don't have any clothes on, right? I would like someone to be honest and tell me that things aren't as good as you might think they are. Because if I find out later that, man, I didn't realize we were struggling. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say something to me? That's our responsibility and our obligation to have those courageous conversations.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great question, because it really, I think it also leads to the one of the core underlining issues, in this question, in our community. Folks who are like, hey, it's not me, it's not me, I'm good, and look, my organization's good, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would ask questions, say, hey, great, well, my organization or my purpose, I'd love to hear more about how you are addressing, these facts that are out there. Like, I'd love to hear more about that. So you're proclaiming that this is happening, so tell me more. Like, and really engage in the conversation with them, because perhaps they have something to offer that you didn't think of. And right away you're thinking, oh, they're just saying that, but look, they're all white. But maybe they actually do have a diverse community of people. One of my good friends, she has blonde hair, but she's the great granddaughter of Chief Joseph. She gets asked to go to places and be part of ceremonies and all that. So it's not always about color, it's a racism issue.
Right.
So I would be careful about our own, preconceived ideas with them. It's a great question, because it actually causes me to hold the mirror up. Like, how would I respond to that? And why am I thinking that they're obviously not diverse when they're proclaiming that they are? Am I thinking that because of color? Am I thinking that because, why am I thinking that? Like, it's really time for us to just be cautious in our American enthusiasm to fix things right away. Okay, that's where caution needs to be right here, is that our cultural things to fix it right now, to address it right now. Someone just said that, oh, I need to address it. I need to confront it right now. Slow down. Say, okay, ask questions, get close. Let's figure it out together. Because maybe they have something to offer. Maybe I have something to offer them. But this is a courageous conversation that we need to continuously have, and there's not going to be an immediate answer to every single question that we propose, but we should engage in the conversation and have it never stop until it actually changes. In this nonprofit culture, my friends the biggest question I receive via emails or text is about white privilege. I'm educated, I'm poor, I'm in the nonprofit community. It's not me. So can you talk with me, Kair, like how do I embrace this? And within an hour, usually there's tears involved and everything else. It's okay to say, you know what? I need to address this and voice my uncomfortable feelings with this. So that's a great question, but I would caution us to want to fix it with our American energy all the time.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to invite people to stay on past the 3:30 mark if you can, so we can sort of continue and get to any other questions that people might have. And I also want to ask the facilitators, are you open to be contacted by people in the community if they have further questions or they want to bounce some ideas? Kyron says yes.
Absolutely.
No. Absolutely. I'm just being a jerk. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So I will collect everyone's information that doesn't mind being contacted directly, and I will share that out with everyone who's here today. So before we continue, if anyone has any other questions, I just want to thank everyone again for joining us, and to please look at the rest of our programming that we have that will run through September 8th. I put the link to our page in the chat, so please take a look, sign up, and thank you. So if you need to leave, please feel free. And if anyone else has any other questions that they really were dying to ask, if you want to type it in, please do so, or you can just unmute yourself and ask the question directly if you feel comfortable to.
For those who have to go, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Innocent.
So we'll stay on the call for a while. If there's any other questions or folks want to continue to talk and have some more courageous conversation. Cynthia, were there a few more questions that maybe came through that we can just continue talking about a little bit, or?
I can scroll back. There is one question. Yes, you do need to register per workshop. Let me see.
So can I read one of the questions?
Oh, sure.
In practical terms, we're talking about who we promote, who we hire, who we push forward opportunities. On what basis do we define diversity? And are the guidelines for thinking about this in practical terms? I think that's a great question. I think just everyone, we all live off of thin budgets and all this stuff, and we're trying to move the needle on our mission, and we need to hire people, so you need to have good people. So I think that's an important question for all of us to talk about. There's only a few of us too on left on here, but one of the things I would throw out there is a piece of the conversation in regards to systemic racism specifically is opportunity. We're only just one generation away from being able to have the opportunities, physical, practical opportunities to be able to advance ourselves in this culture, right? In Arizona, I'm a real estate agent. I don't really practice, so don't send me like house requests, whatever. But I am licensed. But there are still laws on the books about redlining and things like that. So as early as the early 50s, late 40s, it was against the law to sell property to anyone who was non-white in Arizona. What does that mean? It was legal to own land, because that would have gone, but it was against the law to sell that, right? So that means that there's only the 30-year house that gets passed down, and now you have equity, which you can go to college and you can do things, open up a small business. So there's like some practical historical things that affect opportunity for people to go to college, to be able to pay for these things and be at the ready for you to hire, right? So that's part of the conversation. So I look at this. So I don't have a college degree. I've applied several times for fun with friends of mine who don't recognize that my first name's Kevin, right? They don't recognize the application and they're looking for someone in the position I apply and they decline it. And then I call them and they were like, yeah, are you available? I'm like, you already declined my app, bro. I don't have a college, you put on there, no college degree. So you hired someone who's just out of college with 1 year experience. Good luck on that, right? And so look at your hiring practices. Do your hiring practices, are they in line with this conversation about opportunity, about experience? Do they represent the community of people that you're trying to serve? You might have someone coming out of prison that is better suited for the position than someone with a college degree. So really, evaluate what your guidelines are, and will it serve your mission for the people that you're trying to serve with your organization.
Just to add on the hiring practice, in a former life where we employed about 14,000 employees, the hiring process was very, very scripted because, it's a large organization, a lot of employees. And, when you talk about the hiring practices, we know at that point in time, there were some individuals who wanted to see a certain look to a position, right? So we had to modify that process. And sometimes I think even with smaller organizations, you have to do that. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. If it means, if you're in fear that you may have some of those bias in your hiring process, you can take those resumes and scan them without the name, right? And just look at the experience. Because sometimes names, particularly in the African-American community, they're dead giveaways, right? There's a certain name and you associate that with an African-American person. But I'll tell you, when we modified that process, what we were getting was the best qualified candidate. Because now they're presenting and interviewing based on their skill set. Not any identifiers, not any name, not addresses, because there's other biases out there that may not be just a name. It may be like, oh, look at this zip code. Oh my goodness, that's in the hood. Do I really want them to work here? And these are things that people subconsciously do. So,
Yeah.
I think you got to really look at, alternative methods to screening qualified candidates.
There was a question that I did see early on, let's see if I can remember it, pertaining to diversity and sort of that definition, just that it could be very subjective, what somebody might think is diverse versus somebody else. And so how else can you sort of create diversity in a more practical sense without like using that term or, that's my question. I'm paraphrasing.
All right, one of my, I can't speak today. to sort of springboard off of that, I'm curious, would you recommend spending the time to define what it is an organization is looking for or is pursuing related to any component of DEIA? Would you recommend starting with defining some of that or not?
I would. I think because of the conversation we're having about diversity meaning different things to different people, literally in the course of trying to have the conversation, what one, person A is perceiving and sharing from in regards to diversity has one meaning, and they're trying to communicate with someone who has another meaning, and it's just not fruitful. So I think first and foremost, having an understanding of what those terms mean, period, and then defining it for the organization so that everyone is using the same language. I think that's where some of the offense comes from as well. Because when we hear the earlier question about diversity versus affirmative action, I would have never, I don't know why I connected the two, but yes, there are some people who, when they hear one term, it's equal and you know, it's on par with the other term. So an organization's ability to define those terms for itself, so they have some working definitions, I think is important. However, I would caution against their working definition being so far from what the larger world definition is, because then what you're doing is actually self-serving and not community serving, not sector serving. So yeah.
Gotta really, I think we need to really put our foot down too. Like that's what this is all about. So if we go to the U of A or the Pima, you know, Pima Community College or whatever, we look at the pipeline, what's there, you know, and my son is going to the Eller School of Management. And I'm looking at the pipeline for executive leadership, what's there, right? And then you look at the community here in the Southwest and how that, you know, is made up of. And so it's almost like there needs to be another word, because I do believe that diversity is also an excuse, just as, hey, let's put out a survey, let's have a conversation, and let's move on. And then let's put a badge on the front of the door that says, hey, we're all for you guys, you know? So I think it also has to do with, you know what? No, we're going to hold. I want our organization to reach out to the college and say, and other sources, no, we need to hold. The whole community needs to be responsible to this conversation, and we want to be part of the community in this conversation. This is not an isolated thing, and I think that's a cautionary thing. Like, we continue to see ourselves as lone executives with a lone nonprofit organization, and not part of the bigger picture, part of the community in this issue. And I think we'll be back here in 20 years. Diversity initiatives have been around for I don't know how long, and affirmative action has been around we know how long, right? And really good diversity initiatives have been around for a while. I've been part of some wonderful companies that do, you know, consulting work with that. So I don't personally believe that we should land on that. We need to land on, what does it look like for your organization to be part of a collective group of people, not just organizations, that hold our community responsible, including ourselves, to this conversation. Because there's not enough education. Are you kidding me? Tucson, the education here, as you know, we go on the south side, the schools there, you know, it's and we talk about pipeline and opportunity and resources to fill our ranks of executives and leadership in our nonprofit. It's not good. It's flat out not good. And so we need to continue this in a non-business way of just like, no, we need to put our foot down right now and be part of this courageous conversation, my company with the community, because the pipeline is terrible for our culture.
Well, I didn't want to disappear and be rude, but I do have to interview a prospective board member. I want to say thank you all for your time. It's been
No,
great.
that's interviewing.
And I hope seeing you all around again, all right?
Thank you, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Are there any other questions to the group that anyone would like to pose? No? Okay, so I'm going to take that. Oh,
There's that last question there.
do you see it?
Yeah, the most pushback we received from our constituents to educational materials and statements has been around white privilege. There's so much denial and discomfort around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think that's where we have to talk about or reflect on history and the things that we don't know about the country's history. So this term comes up and it makes some people feel guilty But that's a legacy of how the country grew and developed. And it wasn't fair to a lot of people. And it was especially advantageous to other people. So as the generations and the decades passed, we've come to realize that we are a victim of our past. And there are things that have become normal or way of thinking, or these biases that we have. They start in the household. You get those biases in grade school. They're in high school. There's a lot of history you don't learn. So you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. All you know is what's been put in front of you at the time, at this point in life. So there are, that's a problem. That needs to be, that's one of those things you get uncomfortable with. Mm-hmm. and speak out loud about. Mm-hmm.
Cynthia, real quick, can you provide the email for private questions?
Yes. Mm-hmm. It's success, and I'm typing it as well, success@raisethebarllc.com.
And Milton, to your point, and in addition, I think part of the challenge with the conversations around or the issues around white privilege sometimes come from a history within perceived white communities and white communities that is not shared, right? So there are people who are now identified as white Americans, some of my ancestors who were not identified as white when they came here. So for example, the part of my heritage that is Italian, we actually were identified as Black when we came to the States. We lived in communities with African Americans, we owned businesses together, watched each other's kids, this kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. But there is a reality in our culture where at some point you are seen as passing, right? So you've got these communities, these white communities, primarily Italian, Irish, Latin communities where, out in the Southwest, people identify as Hispanic as if it's a separate race, but in other parts of the country, people identify as white and Hispanic or Black and Hispanic and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I think that what we don't really talk about and becomes a sticking point for people feeling like they don't have as much privilege as this other group is that their shared history is not the same, right? And it doesn't mean that many of us don't have a certain privilege, but it's sort of like taboo to have that conversation within communities that seem homogenous now, that our history is not homogenous. And, many of us were not wealthy heirs of people from England. We didn't own land. We didn't own people. Like we don't have that really visceral conversation about how not all of us are even comfortable with what's perceived as our own whiteness, nor are we comfortable because a lot of people assume that we are not people of color in some ways because they just assume that if you look white, you don't have any African heritage or Latino heritage or something like that, which you actually may have. So I think that is kind of this messy sticking point with the whole white privilege discussion that it can also get co-opted, but it is something that's under the surface that we don't have a good way of talking about in our culture. In this country either. I don't know where we go with that, but because we're having these courageous conversations, I'm putting it out there because I think it's something that people talk about behind closed doors.
One of the things we talked about in our first session was terminology and not using terminology that's a fireball that immediately turns your audience off. And white privilege is probably one of those terms. Because if you're going to have a conversation, you need to have open minds, and the terminology helps you keep those minds open. So I don't necessarily prefer the term white privilege, but it does have a definition. When you say it, it means something to everybody, I believe, but it's different things to everybody. And I go back to, the long history of America is that we have had privileged sections of the society. And they have taken advantage of those that are not like them. Because the Italian Americans were discriminated against. The Catholics have been discriminated against. The Irish have been discriminated against over time. Where did the first discrimination start? I don't know. Was it with slaves in this country? But the country has a history of discriminating against those that aren't mainstream.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, and I don't think it's all or nothing, right? Like, I totally acknowledge that if I'm in a Best Buy, nobody's going to assume, most people are not probably going to assume when they walk by me that I might steal a TV, right? Like, I live with a certain level of privilege because of how people see me, whether or not that's my actual identity. I think that that's important to acknowledge, but I do think that there's, not to just disclaim what I just said. I just think that there are some, that this is a little more complicated than what we talk about, but at the same time, it's really important for us to balance so we don't go down a rabbit hole of everybody is equally victimized, because the reality is that that's not true, right?
And that needs to be part of this whichever program that gets started. That conversation, that phrase and that ideology needs to be a part of a courageous conversation. When you talk about diversity and inclusion, that's part of it.
See, the after party is always so good. The after party.
One of the things that the images that I've been holding true, when I was young, I don't know what movie or whatever, but I have a clear image when I was like 3 or 4 or 5 of seeing images of the Holocaust in Germany, with the bodies and all of that, right? Those things like burn in your mind. Like, you don't even, it changes the conversation. Like, there's no courageous conversation. It's just like, that should never ever happen again. Period. Like, that's like, there's no halfway point. There's no, you know what I mean? There really hasn't been. Like, Germany now is a wonderful country to visit and all these things, right? Because it was so dramatic, so horrific what happened, and the whole world saw it, that it was just, it was like, boom. It was like, bam, over, right? So the image that my father talked to me before he passed, and we've talked a lot about this, he passed last year, and he founded the What's Happening Coffee House in the middle of the Watts riots in 1965. There was one warehouse left standing. Went to a Jewish church, and he and about 20 other teenagers did this coffee house gathering with music about how to create change in LA. So my father's been doing this for 50 years, and he said, take that image and just paint the bodies black. Like we don't have images of the millions and millions that were killed to create the free labor for which this country now stands on, right? This conversation is deep, and like it's real easy to like slide into like an intellectual coffee house mentality and whatnot, which needs to happen for safety, but also with courageous conversations. Like think about that, because that's when that officer put his knee on his neck, that was a lynching. That's what a lynching looked like. And if you ever want to look at like the Little Rock 9, there is a photo exhibit of that of those 9 students walking the gauntlet for 27 days in 1957 to go to that first segregated high school. Look at the pictures of the teenagers in the community standing on their lawns while they were using a baseball bat with a fictitious black teenager hanging from their tree. Look at the smiles, the laughter, the dresses. They look like they were in a 1950s movie. The grandma on the porch, ready with the Southern hospitality inside, right? Those, you know, we're talking about systemic racism here, and that's why this change is so profound right now. So it's real easy for us to slip into coffee house conversation with this. And if you think about, if you paint those bodies black, then it gets real. And so I don't know what that means to us. That's why I'm open. I want to learn from 17-year-olds right now. Last night, Anastasia and them, they talked for 2 hours here. You know, just, you know, giving an hour of listening intently because they're young, you know, and they didn't grow up in the 50s and 60s. They're growing up now. And they think, you guys are all crazy. Like, they're like, you know, so the white privilege thing is really important because I have a lot of great friends who are in tears over that issue, Jennifer. You know, and many of them felt like their voices haven't been heard. Like millions feel like, you know what, I'm a hardworking immigrant American, and now people look at me like I am, you know, part of Hitler's regime because of my skin. I don't understand. And so having compassion and love in this is so important. But while you're giving that hug, don't stop whispering the reality of what's going on.
I think that's a great way to end. Thank you all again for joining us. Please check out the other presentations that we have. We have next Tuesday and Thursday, the following week. So please check them out and sign up if you have not already. Thank you all to our facilitators who were here today. Thank you, Jennifer, for providing the platform. And yeah, this is recorded, so we will be sharing this with everyone. And thank you. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Contributed. It's a top-notch, awesome, as Chiron would do. Hands up.
And
All right.
the hug.
See you soon. Yeah, hands up and the hug. Okay.
There you go.